Okay, let's dive right into this explainer by talking about a feeling that, well, I know a lot of you are all too familiar with. It's that completely exhausting reality of always being the one people call for last-minute favors. You know, you're covering the extra shifts, you're the one dealing with someone else's absolute crisis at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. If you've ever felt like a magnet for difficult people who just take and take and take, well, stick around because you are in exactly the right place.
This whole dynamic forces us to ask a really tough question. Why do you keep meeting the exact same person just in different bodies? If you've ever looked around your life and wondered why the users, the manipulators, and the completely emotionally exhausting people seem to zero in on you specifically, I really want to validate your experience right now. You aren't imagining it, and it is absolutely not random.
So here is the crucial reality check. We often tell ourselves this comforting little myth, right? We say, I'm just cursed with bad luck. It just happens to me. But the truth is actually much more intentional. You are being targeted for your emotional availability. People who exploit others are actively reading your generous cues, and they're deciding that you are a high-value investment. They literally do not choose their targets by accident.
To understand how incredibly fast this targeting actually happens, we have to look at this classic, honestly fascinating piece of research. It's the 1981 Grayson and Stein study. Researchers basically filmed ordinary pedestrians just walking down a street in New York City. Then they showed this silent footage, so literally just body language, to a group of incarcerated violent offenders and asked them to rate who would be an easy target.
Now, what's truly mind-blowing here is what those offenders were actually looking for. Size, strength, gender, not the major factors. No, they zeroed right in on stride length, posture, fluidity of movement, and whether someone just seemed completely unaware of their surroundings. You see, exploitation isn't a coin flip. It is rapid, unconscious pattern recognition. And this exact same scanning mechanism applies to emotional relationships too. People are constantly scanning for who will yield to them.
Let's bring this to life with a concrete example. Think of a woman named Elena, a composite character based on patterns therapists see literally every single day. So Elena was the emotional caretaker in her family right from childhood. When she met her partner, Daniel, he ran these early boundary tests on her by intensely oversharing his personal trauma right out of the date. He was watching. He wanted to see if she'd absorb all that emotional weight without asking for anything in return. And to him, she passed the test with flying colors.
Elena's story brilliantly illustrates what psychologists call the empathy trap. It's this pretty tragic phenomenon where your natural capacity to sense and share in another person's emotional state involuntarily broadcasts your availability. The shadow side of empathy is that your absolute best qualities, your instinct to connect and help people, actually make you highly legible to people who are just looking for a one-way transfer of energy. Without even meaning to, you're signaling that you will take on their pain as your own personal responsibility to fix.
But why exactly does your availability read as a giant green light to these folks? Well, it comes down to a cluster of traits known as the dark triad. Coined by psychologists Paul Huss and Williams back in 2002, this encompasses narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Individuals who score high in these traits share a really fundamental transactional view of the world. They genuinely view other people primarily as resources to be used.
So if you're operating from that kind of transactional framework, finding an accommodating, highly empathetic person like you isn't just, oh, how nice. It's like walking down the street and discovering a wide-open, unlocked door. These people are highly skilled at rapid social calibration. They aren't even necessarily targeting the weak, they're targeting the accommodating. They constantly adjust their behavior just to see what you're going to tolerate.
But, this begs a pretty massive question. Why are you so accommodating in the first place? Well, this vulnerability is very often deeply rooted in your early childhood attachment history. According to attachment theory, which was developed by John Bowlby, our early bonds create a literal template for our adult relationships. You might have learned very early on that love and safety were strictly conditional on you being useful and totally emotionally undemanding to your caregivers.
And this brings us right to the fawn response, which is a survival strategy popularized by therapist Pete Walker. Look, if you learned in childhood that the absolute safest way to handle unpredictable or threatening people was to just appease them, to become endlessly helpful, that behavior gets hardwired into your brain. If fawning was your survival strategy at age 7, it becomes your relational default setting at age 27. And toxic people, they sense that default setting like an ocean current pulling them right in.
Now, right about now, you might be asking yourself a really frustrating question. Okay, if I know something is wrong and I can completely recognize this trap, why is it still so incredibly hard to leave or to just say no? Why do you stay when every single fiber of your being knows you're being used?
The answer to that lies in a psychological concept called ego depletion. Basically, our capacity for resisting impulses and holding our boundaries is a finite resource. It gets completely drained during emotionally demanding interactions. Every single time you try to set a boundary with a toxic person, you aren't just making a simple logical choice. You are fighting an exhausting uphill battle against a lifetime of learned instincts. It is absolutely not a failure of your willpower. You are literally just exhausted.
And when you add cognitive dissonance to the mix, the trap just gets deeper. This is that intense mental discomfort we feel when our beliefs clash with our actions. Think about it. If you believe you're a smart, discerning person, but you keep getting taken advantage of, your brain hates that tension. It despises it. So it actually becomes way easier for your brain to tell you that you are just cursed with bad luck, rather than force you to face the painful reality that you have a deep, learned pattern that you need to unlearn.
Consider another great example from the therapeutic world, David's story. Now, David was actually highly perceptive. He sensed red flags immediately in his relationships. He wasn't bad at reading people at all. What David lacked wasn't insight. He lacked internal permission. He simply didn't feel allowed to act on his instincts, so he was constantly overriding his own gut feeling in the name of being helpful or being the nice guy.
David's story reveals a massive, really liberating truth. Empathy is your innate, hardwired capacity to connect and care. That is a beautiful thing, and it is absolutely not the problem here. The real problem is that you were never taught to pair that gorgeous empathy with discernment. Discernment is a built, learned skill designed to protect your empathy. It's exactly what keeps your innate capacity from being exploited by the wrong people.
Okay, so how do we actually fix this? Let's get into the practical stuff. Here are 3 concrete steps to break the pattern and shield your emotional availability. Step 1. Treat your availability as a highly valuable, finite resource, not some bottomless well. Step 2. Actively notice those early boundary tests. And step 3. Do the incredibly hard work of separating your inherent self-worth from your usefulness to other people.
To execute step 1, you really need to pace your giving. I absolutely love this insight on boundaries from psychologists Henry Cloud and John Townsend. They say, healthy boundaries are not walls that keep people out, but property lines that clarify what is and isn't your responsibility. That's so good, right? You have to slow down your giving. Make people actually earn your trust and support over time through genuine reciprocity.
And you can start practicing this whole property line concept today by adopting one really simple habit. Whenever someone asks you for a favor or demands your emotional labor, just pause before you answer. Give it a second and ask yourself, do I actually want to do this, or do I just feel like I have to? That tiny, simple pause is exactly where you begin to take your power back from those old, hardwired instincts. For step 2, think back to that Grayson and Stein study we talked about earlier. Exploiters are always reading your cues, so you need to actively watch out for these early tests. Things like intense, immediate oversharing designed to force a totally false sense of closeness, or someone pushing past a really small no just to see if they can wear you down into a yes. Or maybe they suddenly escalate their needs the exact moment you show a bit of independence. They are testing you to see if you're going to fold. Don't fold.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this really powerful refrain. Being targeted by toxic people is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is evidence that something is completely right with you. Your generous capacity to care is a true gift. But anyone who only stays close to you when you are endlessly giving to them, they were never actually close to you. They were only close to what you provided. You have the power to build your armor of discernment, and you can start today. So the next time someone unexpectedly demands your energy, are you going to leave the door unlocked, or are you going to start checking their credentials?